Hello, everyone. Nick Payne, Crossroads Community Church, Winchester, Virginia. Wanted to share a few thoughts that the Lord has been speaking to me during this really kind of crazy time we're in. I'd love for you to leave a comment. And if this is your first time visiting our page, hit like and subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. Really, what the Lord was speaking to me was throughout history, we have moments like this. When tragedy comes and affects our nation, it affects our regions, localities, and in this case, worldwide. These moments have the capability of changing the course of history and even marking a generation. So much so that when we look back at this, we see the greater effects. Right now, it's kind of hard to see because we're in the woods, and it will only be after this is past that we'll be able to look back and have a higher perspective and be able to see a little bit clearer once this is past. For this generation, it appears almost as if this pandemic, this virus, will be kind of a defining time. For me and my generation, it was September 11th, 2001. I, like most, felt as if the world was ending that day. And in a lot of ways it did. It was no longer the same. Economically, world travel, even conspiracy theories were shifted after the tragedy of 9/11. And certainly my perspective changed. And in a strange way, my innocence almost felt as if it was taken that day. It felt not that I did anything I was guilty of anything or I did anything wrong, but that day that the towers were hit and terror came on the shores of my understanding that I was very unaware of before. And really, I'd only read about things in history books or watching documentaries about tragedies of the past. I became aware of something that was hidden. I was in a state of unknowing. I had become conscious to something that I didn't know that was going to be there. And it was odd because to some people, what they did that day felt oddly right, but to others, it was terribly wrong. September 11th, 2001 completely marked my generation. And I was liking it to my parents' generation and the things that happened to them. Some older parents, maybe Vietnam, and others, maybe the Cold War, and the things that they had to do in school. My mom shared with me stories about they would have to practice getting under desks because they thought that there might be a threat of a nuclear attack. And so those things mark you. Hopefully they don't define you, but they do most certainly might mark you. And that's why I titled this message, Don't Be Defined by Tragedy. And I was also reflecting maybe back even a little further to 70 AD and the Hebrew people. And as they're surrounded by the Roman army, their walls of the great city of Jerusalem are surrounded and soon to be sieged and taken down, completely marking not just a generation, but in that case, a people, because something very tragic happened that day. So I asked myself, what really did I become conscious of? Was it good versus evil, or even man's failed attempt at defining morality? I've had this thought for almost 20 years, and over time it has matured into this, and that is the tree of good and evil versus the tree of life. It seems rather simplistic, but it boils down to this: good versus evil versus God. Genesis 3:9, the Bible shares the story of that there's multiple trees in the garden. One of them is the tree of life. The other one is the tree of knowledge of good versus evil. And God instructs Adam and Eve that they're able to eat from all the trees of the garden. But he spoke specifically about the tree of knowledge of good and evil and told them to hold back, refrain from eating from this tree. But the tree of life was fully there. Now I'm taking a few liberties in the translation, but you get the point, is that God was sharing that there was plenty of trees to choose from, but they did not, but refrain from eating from the tree of knowledge. And then We all know how the rest of the story goes, or most of us do, and that's they were deceived into eating from the tree of knowledge. And from that point forward, everything was totally changed. That time in history marked humanity, and in sometimes not, and in really not such a good way. This time that we are in will be remembered as a time when the whole world had to respond for the sake of all humanity. And our response will reveal who we really are. Will we be able to pause and seek God and what is He speaking to us? Or will we allow ourselves to be run by fear that the whole world is coming to an end? Our response is different than the response of the world. Our response should be that of the children of God, not based in fear, not based in the signs of the time, but rather based in who our God is. And I was even thinking about the Babylonian captivity of Israel, Daniel, Esther, others that were there too. They were in a foreign kingdom where they weren't in charge. They had to abide by the rules of the land. And in no way am I using Babylon as a description towards the United States or towards this pandemic, but merely how men and women who were in captivity in Babylon never allowed the situation to define who their God was. Merely, I want to use it as a description and a perspective that those who are anchored in Yahweh are not moved by anything. We have the opportunity as the global body of Christ to respond as sons and daughters and not as orphans. I want to finish with this. In times of great distress, tragedy, we are not just believers, but we are followers of Christ that have a great responsibility. Not to respond like the world, like I said earlier, but we respond with patience and love, listening to the words of our leaders. Even if we don't fully agree with them, we still listen to them because they've been given charge, they've been given offices, and they deserve our respect, and they deserve a level of honor. We also should respond with love towards others. We should be helping when we can. We should be reaching out and helping people with meals. When we go to the store, reaching out to somebody that we know that might not be able to get out and help them go. Grab some stuff for them, bring it to them, and even just leaving it at the door and not expecting something in return. A friend of mine shared a story how he was delivering meals, and when he dropped off something to at somebody's house, they didn't want to have interaction because of their autoimmune disease. And it really hit him hard there because we're so used to being able to stop and pray and lay hands on somebody. But during this time, it's wise sometimes to pray from a distance, to give them what we came as, filled the need, we brought food, but then, remember that there's people's lives are at stake and it's saving their lives by staying inside. Was John chapter 3 verse 35 is one of my favorite verses because it says, "This is how the world will know that you are my disciples, is that you have love for one another." And then chapter 13 and verse 15 says, "What greater love a man has than one who lays down his life for his friends?" Our response right now is vitally important. And during this time, I want us to remember this. This time doesn't define who we are, and it most certainly doesn't shape or change our view of God. This needs to be a time where we press into God, where we seek Him, like Matthew 6:33 and 34 says. This time needs to be a time of great strength, of faith in the unchanging God. And as we walk in our lives as doers of the word, not just hearers like James tells us, but we will make our God known. And the goodness of who He is will draw people in. This is what we should be focusing on. And so during this time, I just want us to not allow this time of tragedy to define who we are as a people. What we need to be defined by is our great love for God, our love for his people, and our love for those who might not know him yet, might have been hurt by somebody else or by the church. But it's the goodness of God that draws people in. So I just want to pray that we all act as we should, followers of Christ, doers of the word, and we won't let this tragedy define a generation. Hope you all have a great day, and we will check in again later.